fans, welcome to The Link, home with the newsman for the Six, on Burgundy.
I'm sorry, it's the pleats.
Jack and Matty D.
He is dialed in.
Speed wash. Big Hubbard. What time is it, Matty D?
4:22.
All right, let's go. Good evening, Six. Welcome. I'm your host, Greg Hubbard. Yes, welcome to your 2023 Eve of the Draft edition. Yeah, I think I mastered that cheesy news person voice. Before we get started, the first domino has fallen. And just as we talked about yesterday, Gary Trent Jr. has opted into his one-year extension, and that means a fired-up Gary Trent Jr. next year for our Raptors, who will be seeking some more money next offseason. Somebody get this man some Thai food. That's better. I really struggle with how to start a video like this. You work so hard on researching stuff that I don't want to regurgitate things. And if there's one thing you notice when you start looking into the draft each year, is that so much shit is regurgitated. Mock drafts imitate each other. YouTube videos for scouting just take the same clips, put the same strengths and weaknesses as everybody else, and then pretend it's their own work. I don't want to do that. I want to present you with a selection that I think is really good, that people don't have the whole story on, and I would love this player at 13, and yet I wouldn't even be talking about him if I didn't learn so much about his story by really digging through the resources, and I even reached out to some people from his college town to get the inside scoop on him. I really think you're going to enjoy this. So I'm going to present that in a mock draft, but first I'm going to show you some of the resources I use to prepare myself for the draft each year, starting with what I call the list. Then we're going to take a look at a cliche concept that is highly relevant right now, because every year we have the discussion of fit versus best player available. And after Dan Tolzman's interview with the Raptors today, it's even more relevant because he speaks to this exactly. So we're going to have a look at the nebulous concept of best player available and what that means, and how it's actually malleable and not such a firm concept. Then we're going to take a look at another concept that I use, and that's the idea of opportunity. From there, I'm going to do a totally left field mock draft just to show you that the idea of Wemby, Scoot, Miller, and then suddenly there's a fall off is silly. There are real reasons why the draft might not play out the same way it is mocked by so many people regurgitating other people's thoughts. I wouldn't be doing my job if I let us all get caught with red sauce on us again this year. Let me know what you think, and I hope you like my selection. I promise you, he is totally left field, and people have been down on this guy. He's dropping down boards, and yet I expect him to be a lottery pick. And I think he might be the steal of the draft. Cheers, guys. Enjoy the video. You can always skip around with the timestamps. So without further ado, here's the list. For draft research, whether you're a Raptors fan or simply a draft fan who wants to get the best bang for your buck, even late in the draft, this is the list you need to know. And I'm going to start you off in 2018, just so you get the significance of some of the players on this annual list. So here we go. You'll notice right away on the 2018 list, Malachi Flynn is fourth down. We got Vernon Carey on there from Duke in 2018. He's one of my son's favorite players that we've seen at the 905 this year. He plays for the Go-Go. He's also anecdotally a really pleasant young man. I've had this pleasure of speaking to him. In fact, he's the guy that told me on back-to-back nights in Mississauga this year when the Go-Go were in town, the second night, Jordan Shekel, who's a really competitive player in the G League, wasn't there the second night, and I said to Vernon, "Where's Jordan tonight?" And he said, "Oh, he got traded." And he ended up getting traded for my guy, Trevion Williams. So Trevion's with the Go-Go, and Vernon was the guy that actually told me that that trade took place. We got Luka Garza, Peyton Pritchard, Jalen Smith, Obi Toppin. 2019, we've got Ashton Hagens, who I've had the pleasure of speaking to a few times. He played for the 905. DeAndre Hunter, Matisse Thybulle, Grant Williams, Zion Williamson. 2020, Jacob Gilyard, who I believe is with the Pelicans organization. He's on this list 3 years in a row. There's Hagens again. Off-Night Mitchell. 2021, Charles Bassey, who I believe is with San Antonio and Coach Pop right now. Jacob Gilyard again. Oh, Herb Jones. There's a player that came out of nowhere, apparently. Davion Mitchell again, Evan Mobley, Yves Pone, Neemias Queta, who is with Sacramento and had a wonderful G League last year, Vital again. My favorite player from 2022 that we couldn't quite reach in the draft, Tari Eason. Gilyard for the third time, Walker Kessler, Chet Holmgren, a name we've all become familiar with and fallen in love with, Christian Koloko, Kevin McCullough, who appears on this list twice and will probably be an unsigned rookie this year. Mark Williams, who was a #1 draft pick last year, and one of my favorite interviews of both last year and this year, Oscar Tshiebwe.
It takes a lot of time to study. I studied the greatest rebounder in the NBA, Dennis Rodman. That man, he would just get in a position. In that position, you're not going to move him. You're not going to mess with him. If you try to mess with him, he probably will knock your teeth out just to get the ball. I study him so much and get the knowledge.
Yeah, I love Oscar. And he got paid big bucks to stay in Kentucky last year as one of the coach's staff's favorites. And he is an up-and-coming role player with great motor, amazing defender. And I want to see if Oscar can be taught how to become a bit of a distributor from like the elbow. Kind of like what I looked at with Trevion Williams last year. And then the 2023 list is kind of headlined by Canadian Zack Edey, who is the College Player of the Year for the men's division this year. And then we've got names like Trace Jackson Davis, who is probably the highest ranked player on most mock drafts this year, and he's even falling into the second round. Guys, if you haven't figured out what this list is, it's a list of players not mentioned by mock drafts or TV analysts this time of year, and they tend to be going down in terms of momentum before the draft. And that's because their talents are not sexy. And yet by mid-season, those same analysts, the Stephen A's and the Kendrick Perkins that know nothing about the fucking draft, they tend to say things like, oh, this guy came out of nowhere, when these players step up and play really well in their rookie seasons or sophomore seasons. And yet it should be no surprise to anyone that these players have transferable skills, because this list is the Naismith Defensive Player of the Year semifinalist list, which is released every spring. These guys have skills that translate to the NBA no matter what, as at least a bench player. And quite often that skill set indicates a high motor, good effort, real good buy-in, things like that. This list is a list annually that we need to know the names from if we're going to actually have success in the draft. And as you can see, there's a couple Raptors-y names on that list the last couple seasons. The one thing you won't find on this list is one and done players and freshmen. So you won't find like Derek Lively, Cason Wallace, or like Taylor Hendricks on this list. So keep that in mind. So that's the gift that keeps on giving, Clark. You can use it every year. I love the list because it has players that fit every team on it, no matter how late you are in the draft. And I think that's a cool concept, because so often at draft time, we talk about best player available versus fit. And that's a great segue to our next segment. Exploring the draft concept of best player available.
I know you always go best talent available. Does that factor in as a potential tiebreaker when it comes to who might be available wherever you're picking?
I mean, it's a total cliche every year that it's best available, but there actually is something to that. Just because of the uncertainty of rosters at any time, you know, free agency is just a part of that. Yeah. So it's really hard to make any decisions based on a current roster. So you can't deny talent when it's all said and done with the draft picks, because you never know what the team could look like 2 weeks later, a month later, you know, 6 months later. Like, so you just kind of have to, you plan for what's the best decision long term. At least we do, what the best decision is for us long term, regardless of what our current roster situation is.
What's your overall view? I mean, everybody knows one, everybody's somewhat familiar with 2 and 3. What's your overall view of like the draft as a whole in terms of talent level?
It's actually quite deep. I think, yeah, everybody is, you know, kind of going nuts about the top of the draft, which is, it seems like as good as it's ever been, and we seem to be really comfortable with a lot of players in this draft, though. I think we like where we're at 13, and you know, we're getting a lot of offers or things coming across the table for picks all around the draft as well, and there seems to be at a number of different places in this draft there's players to be had. So it's a fairly deep draft, we feel like, and we're pretty happy with where we're sitting right now.
The first thing I gotta hone in on is Doug Smith's question, because it reiterates what I said earlier about regurgitation. Can you repeat it for us, Doug?
I mean, everybody knows one, everybody's somewhat familiar with 2 and 3.
Thanks, buddy. he implies that there's 3 players that everyone knows are the top 3 players. And they may well be, but we're going to discuss why in this video. It's as if it's like the total barf-orama from Stand By Me, where one person barfs and then everyone else is barfing and then it's all over everyone. I mean, those poor Bucks fans. And I presume when it comes to the NBA draft every year, it must have been red sauce that they've been eating. Because what Dan actually answers here in a roundabout way is that there's truth to the idea that some players are simply better than others in the draft. And yet then he confirms that there's something to Doug's question, hence the cliche, in the form of answering about, moving up or down in the draft as potential. And at every level where they could draft, they could be happy with a player. There's something cliche about it, and we all just need to acknowledge that there's something subjective about the best player available. So let's start with the most broad reasons for this, and then we'll talk about the most narrow. He's a generational talent. To expedite this, I want to make it simple. On draft night in 2003, was LeBron James a generational talent? Yes. In 2023, is Victor Wembanyama a generational talent? I actually think yes. A lot of people think that. Is there a generational talent in every draft? That might be a fun exercise for another video. But let's take a look at why Victor is a generational talent. Because if he was being drafted in a different generation with like Yao and Shaq and Robinson and guys like that, I don't think he'd be going first overall, and we certainly wouldn't be calling him a generational talent. So what we do in the game today, and where the game is, thought to be going by coaching staffs and tacticians everywhere, fans alike, determines who is a generational talent and who is not. And for every generational talent, there is a kryptonite that we need to figure out. So players that are generational talents now make other players who may or may not have been valuable in previous years, suddenly, if they prove to be a kryptonite for the way the game is going, like the Wembanyamas, the Chet Holmgren, the Jokic's that can play make, okay, then what's the kryptonite? Because Miami couldn't figure it out, that's for sure, and they figured out everyone else this year. So just like Dan is saying in the interview, everyone can agree on some players because as a league, there's a direction to where things are going, and some players just can't be passed up. Do I think Scoot Henderson is a generational talent? No. Are the other generational talents in this draft? Whew, what a cool question. Maybe we'll talk about that as we do the mock draft. In summary, I submit this. Once the generational talents are off the board, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. What determines beauty to the beholder, the NBA franchise? Well, the obvious one is system. I don't feel like people struggle with that. The one that I feel people struggle with is because people love doing mock drafts themselves and rebuilding teams and playing fantasy sports. And this one I find people really struggle with. It's that you should never draft for need if you can avoid it. So it comes down to what's in your cupboard. I'm a chef. If you cook at home, you follow along here. If you got cinnamon in your cupboard and you see that it's going to either run low or get really expensive, you might get backup cinnamon right then and there when you're at the grocery store, even though you're not out of cinnamon yet. That's how we want to draft. Let me give you a Raptors example. There was a time when this guy was firmly kind of etched as our center. But we didn't wait for him to get too expensive or walk on us like other players have done in the past. We instead, at 9th overall in the Siakam draft, we drafted his backup cinnamon, which was Jakob Poeltl. So this center we've all been screaming for years, the franchise actually had the foresight to draft. We had the center that was supposed to span these last few years in the pipeline. And we were developing both of these guys side by side, the mentor and the understudy at the same time. And when you believe in yourselves as an organization that can develop players, you believe that if a player has this much talent and skill, it's not going to go down in your hands. It's going to go up. So what can you see? What's the potential? And this is beauty in the eye of the beholder. What does each organization see when they look at these players in terms of A, what they have now, and how that translates into the generation that we're playing in? Could it become something else if they lost a little weight or put some on? Could it become something if they had a handle? Could it become something if they could move their feet quick enough, even though they're 6'6", to beat a 7'5" guy to take a charge? Okay, like, this is what's so interesting about the Jalen, defensive Jalens of the world, as they become potentially the kryptonite to the big, versatile, ball-carrying Victors and the Chets. It's so fucking cool, guys. But what you don't do is draft for need when you can avoid it. You always want to make sure you've got some backup cinnamon. In fact, if you're being really smart, you might want to specialize in cinnamon and maybe start selling it yourself and getting it in bulk. So you thus define your version of what best player available is. For instance, the long arm monster. Anyone thinking we're going 100% guard or something this year is silly. Like, if there's a very good wing available to us with the pick that we have, whatever pick that is, that we feel like is like, wow, that's like an incredible wing, that suddenly makes other players on our team who we may prefer, it gives us a crazy asset because it's movable and developable. So you can even determine the timeline and what to move when, and you can even tailor your coaching staff to make sure that at all times you're very good at developing 5-tool wings. Hypothetically, of course. And this is why guys like Troy Weaver are stockpiling a certain type of player too. So anyone knocking Troy Weaver, you tell that fool to shut up. Troy is smart, and they're going to be getting returns for some of these guys that pan out. He's collecting like high potential bigs that are cast-offs like Bagley at contracts that if it works out, great. Otherwise, it holds cap position for him. And they're trying to raise their cap position to be just like us at the luxury tax threshold, just below it. So that's like the smartest thing you can do, and one of the hardest things to do to maintain that. So hence the Fred VanVleet contract. I'll make a video about that. Hopefully maybe tomorrow. We'll see. Anyway, I digress. This is the smartest way to draft. You want to specialize in a spice from now on. I dub my metaphor cinnamon. We want to corner the market in cinnamon if we have one in front of us, because we never want to get in a position where we're out of cinnamon. We might even want to drive up the price of the cinnamon. Does this make sense? Okay, so that's how I think the Raptors are approaching determining what best player available means. And this is why you could be so confident when you make statements like, hey, depending on where we are, there's different players that we like, and each of them play different positions potentially. But at that particular pick, we consider them to be, you know, a really good scenario for us, and therefore the best available player. We are never going to want for cinnamon again. Those are the two draft principles I want to leave you with. Is don't draft for need. Plan ahead. Collect players that you think are valuable pieces to winning a championship that you yourself specialize in developing. And if you're at a position in the draft where the player themselves, the stock of players, where they don't sort themselves out, you want to already have a predetermined definition of what best player available to you is. Now, for those of you that want a total rebuild, I get it, but it's not a smart thing to do for the following reasons. I am an incredibly big fan of fantasy basketball and keeper leagues, and I always blow everything up. I fucking love drafting young players. I love the draft. But it's not the way to do it when you have what these teams lack and sorely will need, and that's mentors, preferably with fucking rings on their finger. And that is good culture. It is not the bad culture that Masai is looking to purge. He's not looking to blow it up. He brought in Otto last year on purpose. He might move off of Fred VanVleet if Fred's money's too high this year. If they structure anything with Fred, I like the idea of it being structured to get cheaper every year. And I think that makes Freddie a marketable vet later in his career. So it's good for the franchise and the player. But there's a financial side to re-signing Fred. And that's just keeping your cap position and not undoing the work you did to position yourself so expertly. Not to mention, this guy is a very good ball player and leader. Anyhow, back to blowing it all up. Blowing it all up for a player that is not a generational talent is crazy. Hence the fact that when I went to make my video about trading Siakam for the number 3 pick that everyone's talking about.
Yeah. Have you heard anything about the Blazers with the Raptors and the number 3 pick, and now it's going as far as Siakam and OG?
Oh, that's fucked up.
You don't think would you ever consider, like, if you want Scoot so bad, do you think Scoot is worth losing OG and Siakam?
Maybe.
I have a confession to make. I love watching Robert Misovich for shit like this. And if Robert really believes that that would be a good trade, then God help the Raptors. That's an insane take. Anyhow, this story is not about Robert. It's about me making my Pascal Siakam trade up scenario for the 3rd overall pick to get Scoot. I was making a video about that too, but then suddenly I had like a draft day premonition and I was visited by a spirit. And as I worked on the video, well, hell, it went something like this. I'm so sick of this 1-year losing streak. I think we're going to have to trade Pascal Siakam for, the number 3 overall pick. I just don't see any way out of this. Let's crunch the math and see what we can come up with. What the fuck?
Nice trade, dude.
You really like my trade? Can I get a confirmation hug, dude?
Bruh. No. We have a problem.
Oh, well then screw you, Precious. Keep it to yourself.
It's Scottie. Scottie Bourne.
I know who you are, Scottie. I'm just frustrated that we're out of options. I feel like the draft should present so many possibilities.
As in infinite possibility.
Yeah, that's what I said, infinite.
Infinite possibilities.
Yes.
Infinite possibilities.
Yeah, like Jalen Suggs, maybe? Keep it up.
Shut up, Doug.
From the moment I had my vision from Scottie, I knew I needed to abandon this folly. It was seriously silly. And there's a saying for it. A bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. Outliers, the power of opportunity. This is Malcolm Gladwell's book, great book called Outliers. Talks about the concept of success, as this is about, the story of success, but it's success through our opportunities in life. For instance, I'm a white male that was fortunate enough to be born in Canada to a middle-class family. I've had a lot of opportunities that other people just don't get in general. It's called privilege, white privilege, right? Male privilege, Canadian privilege, all of those things. The opportunities that we're speaking of are sports opportunities. So a common one, and he talks about it in this book, is age cutoffs for amateur sports. In basketball, that cutoff is, as you can see here, September 1st. So kids born a full year apart play in the same division. Now, that's not a big deal when they're 25 and 26 respectively, but when they're 10 and 11 and the 10-year-old is playing against a full-on 11-year-old, that's an advantage for the 11-year-old growing up. They're just going to get noticed on the field more. They're going to get selected for more teams. Physically, they're just bigger kids because they've had a full year to grow. And a full year for a kid is a massive amount of growth and development. So this is from rookiescale.com, and I'm going to blow it up big for you. But this is the top 100 prospects in the draft. And what we're going to do is we're going to sort them by draft age in the inverse. And it's going to show us who the youngest players are in the draft. There's something to be said for these youngest players. So Gigi Jackson, Derek Whitehead, James Nagy, Noah Clowney. Koulibaly was overseas, so he doesn't really count. I don't know the cutoff in France, for instance. Cam Whitmore, Nick Smith Jr., right? These guys at the top of this list would have always been the smallest kids growing up in their age bracket. So like I said, the guys to keep an eye on here are the younger guys. They would have had less advantage growing up, but now there's going to be more parity because they're all growing into their man's bodies, okay? Now, who are the players that had the most advantage? Well, they're down here at 19.8. So the most advantage based on age growing up would be Jet Howard, Kobe Buffkin, Jarris Wallace, Taylor Hendricks, Grady Dick. Those are players that had advantage growing up because of their age, because they were the oldest kids in their bracket. Now, what about holdouts from last year? Guys that could have entered the draft but didn't. Are there any young ones whose agents might have told them, like, hey, if you go up against this next class, you're going to do a lot better? And honestly, one comes to mind for me, and that's Jalen Hood-Schifino. He's born at the end of the year, like right at the end of the year. I believe he's June. So he would have been almost a full year behind guys in last year's class that were drafted. So good on Jalen Hood-Schifino. And when you notice, what you notice with guys like this born at the end of the year is they tend to have a bit of a chip on their shoulder because they've always been having to fight for jobs and spaces on teams. Also want to mention that the physical side has changed. If a player entered the league looking like this, I don't know, I'm going to say 10 years ago even, we would say, okay, that guy's got a man's frame and he's ready for the NBA, right? Physically. The thing is, this is the benchmark now. This is common. Like, Scoot is in incredible shape, and he's an incredibly physically gifted guy, and he's in great shape. Great personality, great attitude. Scoot's a great prospect. But my point here is there's more physical parity now when prospects in general reach draft age. They all are good physical specimens. Some of them might need more weight, less weight, but many more of them do this. So it takes the physical part of it, of looking for a guy that's got a physique, and it becomes a perk rather than like something you might like really see as an asset, because a lot of these guys are close to this. So that's how age and birth date can affect opportunity in the draft world. Like real sports people, they account for this. This is a known advantage for players growing up. So how have players adjusted to the parity in their ages and their physicality? That's one thing to look for, especially after 1 year in the pros or college. The other factors that can lead to opportunity are just things that happen in life. For instance, the global pandemic. Players like Scoot that were fortunate enough to be with an organization like the G League Ignite didn't get shut down during the pandemic like a lot of high school players would have. A lot of high school players would have not received the same training, coaching, just teamwork, development that a guy like Scoot received during the pandemic, because a lot of high school students were shut down, whereas Scoot just kept playing on in his bubble. That's an advantage for guys like Scoot. And that brings me to some life circumstances that occurred to my featured player for this video. I'm going to give you the first taste of him here. Here is an interview that he did, and I've taken his name out of it so you won't see who it is, but there are some clues to the player if you've been doing your research. Okay, so the following is an excerpt from a local article done by a school reporter from the school of the player that I'm featuring in this video. And as I said, I've taken out the player's name so that you don't get a hint there. But what I want to focus on is the top question here, and I'll blow it up big for you again. So if we take a look at the top question here, the reporter asks, what's the best advice you've received in life? And the player goes on to say that it's just to be patient and have faith in God, because last year I had 2 meniscus surgeries and sat out like 10 out of 12 months of the year. So it was like a battle to get back to where I am now. Better than I was before. So patience for sure, he says. So this player was hard at work rehabbing from 2 meniscus surgeries while other players were being recruited from high school and playing for their high school teams. This player didn't have that advantage. He had a disadvantage. He didn't get to audition in his senior year in high school. He was in rehab. What was happening to a player like Scoot? Well, as we know from a recent feature on him, he was able to train in a private facility and private gym during COVID that his pops runs in his hometown, while the rest of the world was shut down. That's a major advantage for Scoot.
Scoot couldn't be happier as his family not only owned a basketball venue, but gave him 24-hour access.
Yeah, my thoughts at the time was, oh, it's up. Me and my dad, my brother and my sister, we finna be in there every day, like after school, before school. Like that was the first thought that had came to my mind.
So remember, when we're scouting players, we need to look at the opportunities, the advantages and the disadvantages that they've had, and how they've reacted to them. Have they had hurdles and overcome them? Have they developed slower But is there a reason? Have they had major advantages and handouts in life because of their age and birth date, their wealth? Perhaps more importantly is the disadvantages. Has the player had setbacks, disadvantages in life, a lack of opportunity, and yet been resilient and determined enough to overcome them and compete with their peers who have had more advantages and less setbacks in spite of the hurdles? Overcoming a lack of opportunity has the power to build self-efficacy, confidence, resilience. These are the things that I'm hunting for when I'm looking for players that people are sleeping on to get really good value at a pick, or have a developmental player that I think already has super proven upside and is underdeveloped and I can develop them. Now, does that mean that's the best thing to take? No. The advantage to guys like Scoot is that if you have faith in yourselves as an organization, the player starts where they start and you only make them better. If you have a pick and Scoot is sitting there, you literally have a guy that can come in and you don't have to develop him to where he is now. When we talk about ceiling and floor, floor is where they're fucking now. That's the fucking floor. You only have up to go. That's the beauty and reality of these prospects. So I'm not low on Scoot Henderson, but for the purpose of this video, I want to focus on these sleeper picks. And I want to take a really unique spin on the draft to have some fun and show you some scenarios that could play out. So with great effort taken not to regurgitate what you've seen everywhere, but also to justify these selections with actual real things that have to do with relationships and backgrounds and life, I'm going to give you my left field mock draft. Left field mock draft 2023. The Spurs are on the clock. With the first overall pick in the 2023 draft, the San Antonio Spurs take Wembanyama. Let's look at their roster and see what this is going to look like. They got Sohan last year, which is really cool. They brought in Charles Bassey via trade. Same with Branham, which is a good prospect out of Ohio State, a one-and-done guy. They got Vassell, who's really good. They got Kem down there, and they got Keldon Johnson, which is really big. And then their cap holds, they brought in Romeo Langford, one of the Danny Ainge kind of selections when he was in Boston. Sandro Mamukelashvili, yes, I fucking did it. And then they've got Julian Champagny down there now. They've still got Josh Primo's contract kind of on there as a retained cap, so keep an eye on news for Primo because he had issues with, I think it was a team psychologist or something like that, and maybe sexual harassment shit. The Hornets are on the clock. As we could see from Tankathon today, Scoot's back into the second position here. There's one draft scenario that I actually think is reasonably plausible, and that's coming out of Detroit, and that would be a pick swap. So Detroit would swap their 5th pick for the 2nd pick. Bojan would go to Charlotte, along with the contract of Alec Burks and obviously the player. And then coming back would be the Gordon Hayward contract and Gordon Hayward. I like this for Detroit, certainly. I think if that happens, Weaver will take Scoot definitively. And people are going to criticize that and say, well, then he's got, what does he do? How does he give minutes to Scoot, Ivy, and Cade? And the answer is, that's not a problem. That's a good thing, because he can create competition with a bunch of guys that probably need it. They need to be challenged by other people because for a lot of their adult lives, they've been the man. And I think this is valuable. So if Weaver moves up, Scoot definitively for Detroit. If he stays pat at 5 is the scenario we're going to sit with here. So what does Charlotte have is the question. They've got centers, okay? So they've got Kai Jones here somewhere, Mark Williams. There's Kai Jones. They have him listed as power forward. I like JT Thor. I've seen him in the G League a couple times. McGowan's a good shooter, as most people know. And obviously they got LaMelo. In terms of their cap holds, they got Washington, Oubre, Bridges, Svi, Dennis Smith Jr. They've got decisions to make. Theo Maledon. So, like, this is not a team void of players. Like, even Book Knight, he's one of those guys that I don't see necessarily translating right away. I think he's going to need more time to develop in terms of the contact of the NBA, but he's certainly still a skilled guy. I wouldn't give up on him just yet. So this is really where you have to get into the mind of the GM here and think, are they going for it or not? And I think the Hornets have been on the fence a little bit. Probably they go Scoot here because he immediately helps their team. He's immediately usable on this roster for certain, and he's clearly an awesome talent. But for the sake of the fun of this draft, just to not regurgitate, let's instead take Brandon Miller. So with the second overall pick, the Charlotte Hornets select Brandon Miller. Why? He's an older guy from this draft, still a freshman. He can shoot. He immediately steps in and gives them something. He can totally be developed on defense. He's got a great frame, and he seems to have a great attitude. The stuff with his teammates and stuff like that, the character stuff, who knows? That I'm sure they have like guys working for the organizations that can get better answers from Brandon and his camp than reporters at the Combine asking him about it. So with the second overall pick, with confidence, totally great prospect, the Charlotte Hornets select Brandon Miller. The Blazers are on the clock. Let's have some fun, shall we? Roll the clip.
Specifically, how do you think your game and Dame's game complement each other?
Honestly, I love watching Dame game. Watch film on him, and I think we kind of just link as in, he's an off the dribble shooter, catch, shoot, dribble, catch, shoot shooter. He can drive to the basket. He can do a lot of things on the floor. If he could pass, lead at a high level, and I think I can do those things as well. Just areas where I might be faster just because I got younger legs.
Ooh la la, Scoot. Okay, just for fun, let's say Dame takes this the wrong way. In spite of the fact that the Portland Trail Blazers have a very high payroll and should be going for it given their numbers, they pass on Scoot Henderson, who would be an immediate contributor on this team, for fun. So with the third overall pick in the 2023 NBA draft, Portland Trail Blazers select Amen Thompson. Why? Dame's from Oakland. The Thompson twins are from Oakland.
What was it like seeing Dame here for your workout?
It was great seeing Dame. We're both from Oakland. That's somebody I looked up to since I was younger. So seeing him at the workout, it was good to see.
Were you expecting him to walk in, or what was that?
No, I barely even noticed. I looked to my right and I was like, oh shoot. But you got to stay focused. I didn't get to talk to him a lot. I would ask him some questions. If I run into him again today, I want to ask him some more questions. So
the Thompson brothers are very impressive young men who has been playing with NBA-style systems and shown the ability to thrive. Trust me, this scenario is very far from far-fetched. Houston is on the clock. With the fourth overall pick in the 2023 NBA draft, the Houston Rockets select Taylor Hendricks. When you have a roster that includes recent draft picks like Ty Washington, Summer League solid standout, Josh Christopher, and all of these other young players, you're feeling pretty good. And he's done such a good job, Stone has, in Houston, in grabbing two-way players to complement the Jalen Green pick. The Jalen Green pick is the only one that really goes for scoring. After that, these other guys are like 5-tool guys, and the emergence of Garuba and Şengün means having multiple guys on the court from the big man position and having different looks from the big man position make Hendricks, for me, a best player available to make this team able to handle division rivals San Antonio for years to come. It gives them Wemby kryptonite. The Pistons are on the clock. With the fifth pick in the 2023 NBA draft, the Detroit Pistons select Scoot Henderson. If you're a Detroit fan, the fantasy of this is probably giving you a boner. And you're probably saying to yourself, how are we going to do Scoot, Ivy, and Cade? But as I already explained, this is a boon. This is a bird in the hand. And this is lighting a fire under all of these guys' asses and creating competition within your team to really get all of these guys, the big men, but also these guards, really competing for jobs. And I think you're going to see Corey Joseph retained again, although he was a Casey favorite, but I think you're going to see Corey Joseph retained again to kind of groom these guys and talk to them about role and acceptance and doing what's right for the team. So that includes like RJ Hampton. Like they have a really unique set of highly skilled guards. They've even got the really ball secure, responsible guard in the form of Killian Hayes. The Scoot pick allows a team that's not quite ready to go for it to really create competition, increase the value of these already precious resources. This is a no-brainer pick in a fantasy world where Scoot falls to 5. The Orlando Magic are on the clock. With the 6th overall pick, Jeff Weltman and the Orlando Magic take Bilal Coulibaly. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one, guys. Holtmann knows what he's doing. Orlando has a great stable of thoroughbreds. They're one of my favorite teams to watch right now. I think they're almost ready to start adding some serious vets and actually making a push like OKC will be doing this year. I've always loved their pick of Chuma Okeke because it showed a desire to test out different frames within the framework of the NBA. When Jonathan Isaac comes back healthy, they're just going to have this plethora of different looking specialized players for different things. I love that about this team. It means that you could be in the playoffs, and over the course of 4 different series, you might have a guy in series 1 that plays massive minutes but doesn't see any minutes in the next series, like a Caleb Houston. I love the way they're approaching building a team in Orlando. And Coulibaly, to me, is very Magic draft pick. Now on the clock, the Indiana Pacers. With the 7th pick in the 2023 draft, the Indiana Pacers select Jarace Walker from Houston. The Pacers feel great at the guard position. Behind Halliburton, you have the reliability of TJ McConnell and now Andrew Nembhard. Matherin's there. You've got a whole plethora of very versatile wings to play around with. You've got some good big men. They had a hole at the 4, and I think that immediately Jarace Walker steps into this lineup and becomes extremely dangerous. He can plug holes on any roster, this guy. Jarace Walker, for me, is best player available to the Pacers. The Wizards are now on the clock. With the 8th pick in the 2023 draft, the Washington Wizards select Cam Whitmore from Villanova. The experiment to put the ball in Denny Avdia's hands worked brilliantly. Johnny Davis is developing in the G League. Corey Kispert looks to be an amazing shooter. They've got some really good young pieces here, but they've got some salary cap issues they need to sort out. Kyle Kuzma's player option will determine kind of the direction of this team. They've got marketable contracts in the form of Paul, Porzingis, Shamet, and Kuzma that are reasonable in terms of dollar value. We all saw what you can do with the Westbrook contract last year with the Lakers. That trade propelled them, or those series of trade, Rui, Vanderbilt, those trades propelled them pretty deep into the playoffs and really made a difference for the Lakers. So I think the Wizards, if they move their players around properly, can really have a special thing. But it's the emergence of Denny Avdia that makes it so that the Wizards don't covet a guy like Anthony Black or Cason Wallace. The Utah Jazz are on the clock. With the 9th pick, Danny Ainge and the Utah Jazz select Ausar Thompson. As I said, this is a really high character player with great skills that's been playing NBA systems and thriving. He's arguably the better playmaker and defender with some shooting compared to his brother Amen. Not that they should be the only players compared to each other. He's got a great frame, great attitude, really great player, and he complements this like stable that Ainge is picking up. Of the guys that are on the draft board here, looking at what Ainge did, especially in Boston, I think like the names on this board to me, Ausar Thompson just reads the right player for me. He reads very Danny Ainge-ish player. It reminds me of picks that he made in Boston when they were rebuilding there. And I think that that small forward position is something that they could use a sure thing at. And Ausar Thompson gives them, like we talked about before, a floor that is already very impressive, a really, really high character young man who's ready to go to work. Ausar Thompson falling to this position for him is like a no-brainer. Now on the clock, Dallas Mavericks. With the 10th overall pick in the 2023 draft, the Dallas Mavericks select Anthony Black from Arkansas. The Mavericks are like the Trailblazers. They're spending so much money on a team that's not getting into the playoffs, and yet they're in a division they should be winning. Like, they can totally win that division, or should be winning, given the talent on their team and the way they play ball. With Christian Wood and Kyrie Irving, Dwight Powell all probably coming back, the investment in JaVale McGee, this team is looking to actually make a dent and make the playoffs and make a run. I know a lot of Mavericks fans were looking at Grady Dick as a shooter. I think the addition of a guy like Anthony Black, who can play both sides of the ball, he can shoot, and he's responsible. He also gives them a different style guard of the rough and tumble bowling ball that is Jaden Hardy. So I really like the Anthony Black fit here in the Mavericks organization. The Orlando Magic are back on the clock. With the 11th overall pick in the 2023 NBA draft, the Orlando Magic select Sidi Sissoko from France via the G League Ignite. As many of you know, I got to see Sidi play, and he was the most impressive player on the court, and that includes Scoot Henderson that night. He was insanely good, and this is such a Jeff Weltman pick. So they've added Koulibaly and Sidi Sissoko, and I'm telling you, Magic fans, if they do something like this, you are going to be very, very, very happy and very, very dangerous in years to come. Oklahoma City Thunder on the clock. With the 12th overall pick in the NBA draft, the Oklahoma City Thunder select Jordan Hawkins from UConn. Sam Presti likes home runs, so he may go for a more potential upside player here. But I really like the selection of Jordan Hawkins. He's got plenty of upside still. He's a role-playing guy. He can shoot the ball and is one of the best moving shooters in this draft, which is something they could use. His age, he's a little bit older, and his maturity, more importantly, because of his battles he's been through with his brothers in college. He's the type of player that you can add to this team. The ball's in Shea and Giddey's hands. He's perfect here. And I think a movement shooter with some, championship pedigree is exactly what the Thunder will be looking for at this pick. The Toronto Raptors are now on the clock. With the 13th overall pick in the 2023 draft, the Toronto Raptors select, drumroll please, Brice Sensabaugh from Ohio State. What? Now I know how high you are on a lot of these guys on this list, guys. And I'm very high on a lot of them too. Brice Sensabaugh is known for being a shitty defender. That's not very Raptors-y. And I'll say this, if all the information I had about Brice's story was what's available on Twitter and the web, okay, like YouTube and shit, and other casters, I wouldn't be drafting him here. But knowing Brice's history and his life story, I'm telling you, at 13 or even picks above this, Brice is potentially the best player available and the highest upside by far. Let me tell you his story and leave talking about the perks of Brice to Samson and Trey. I'll link their video right here. It talks, everything they say is accurate, but they just look at his offense, which is clearly some of the best shooting in this whole draft, and they move past it, dismissing him because, as most people do, even mock drafters and scouts alike are dismissing Brice because of his lack of defense and the way he was handled at Ohio State. The optics are bad. So let me tell you Brice's story. During COVID, when Brice should have been upping his recruitment stock for college, he instead was recovering from, as we saw earlier, a 2-surgery meniscus tear that has healed more than properly, according to all sources. This caused Brice's recruitment stock to fall. Not only that, he truly just didn't develop any game during those times as a team member. His development stopped. Prior to the meniscus tear, all Brice has been asked to do as a basketball player, because he's a multi-sport athlete, is just score. He's an insanely natural scorer. He's got a high arcing shot, he's got insane handles, he creates space with his dribble, uses his body really well to do that, and then actually avoids contact with an insane freaking fade from all over mid-range. All over. Today's game, we talked about unique players in today's game. Everyone says that with dribble drive kick actions, creating space for other players, the mid-range game is quite often there and viable, but only for guys that hit it at a short clip, like your DeMar DeRozans. So Brice is one of those guys. He fits today's NBA and the shots that are available. He already does what we saw the Raptors trying to do with their 5-headed Hydra offense development this year. And we already heard Darko talk about doing the same thing. Why? Because it's not like a Darko thing or a Nick Nurse thing. The entire league is heading in this direction. Brice suits this to a T and would thrive on a roster that had a great mentor who is a 5-tool kind of point forward. Oh wait, we have one of those who's a 2-time All-NBA All-Star. Pascal Siakam is like the dream mentor for a guy like Brice. Now, Brice has a frame that we don't have in Toronto, and I like this as an option as well, because he's not long and wiry, although he has a 7'2" wingspan, reportedly. So, but he's stocky. Remember Ish Wainwright? He's built more like that. And I really like this. Now, in regards to his frame, he arrived at Ohio State pretty husky because he'd never really trained before. And of course, he was rehabbing, not working out and training to chisel his body. So when he arrived at Ohio State, he's pretty husky, but he's since trimmed down. This is just back in the spring, and you can literally see stretch marks on his body because he's been getting himself in such good shape. So this is a bowling ball of a player already. Like, think, disruptive like a Miles Bridges or a Lou Dort, and he's got more length and more scoring skill. So this is a really, really interesting frame that we've got from Brice, and he earns it honestly because he's got uncles who were in the NFL. He's got like a linebacker body. So frame check, NBA skills on offense check, bad defense, bad playmaker so far. Totally true. But the story is not done. In spite of opportunities being taken away from Brice and the fact that he wound up at Ohio State, where he was not given a de facto starting job because Coach Chris Holtmann started the season with 7 freshmen, including Brice, and talented point guard Bruce Thornton. Chris Holtmann wanted them to remain relevant in the Big East and make the tournament. So he was balancing kind of the minutes with the freshmen and the more senior players. That was working pretty well, and Brice was making the most of his minutes. He performed really well against big men in the conference, like Zack Edey, in multiple games. So that's something to note, and you can look at the stats of those games. But Brice was humble, stayed in the background, was getting better at defense. His offense was good all year, and he was becoming a reliable part of the offense. And what they were doing was Holtmann adapted, so he played by committee. In defensive situations, he would sub Brice off the floor, and in offensive situations, Brice would come right back. Often, Holtmann would spend a timeout just to get Brice on or off the court in favor of a player more suitable or in favor of Brice's scoring. So this is where the knock on Brice comes from. However, Brice never complained. In interviews, he acknowledged that this is just the way the team needs to win right now, and he maintained that the player he wanted to emulate in his game in the NBA is Paul George. He wants to be a two-way player, and he's learning those skills at Ohio State. He never wavered. He never complained. So he basically goes in and out of the starting lineup and starts to earn more starting minutes until this loss to Purdue on January 5th. Brice performs well in it. It sets off a string of a 1-14 run. 1-14. This is major adversity to a largely freshman team that's young. And yet, in the final game of the season, they still set themselves up to be in the Big East tournament. They play this amazing game where Brice was fantastic against Michigan State. They end up losing. At the end of the game, Brice's interview, unsolicited, Brice in his post-game interview says, "This loss is on me. I started the game with poor shot selection. I should have been working more for the team, and I've learned from this. We're going to see them in the tournament. We're going to beat them." What happens in the tournament? This is so amazing, guys. They start the tournament with Wisconsin, who, is not the better team. So they beat Wisconsin. Brice is fantastic in this game. Same with Thornton. Then they upset Chris Murray in Iowa. They beat Iowa, and it's a major upset. Great game plan. They sub Brice on and off, just like they called it, and Iowa couldn't exploit him. In the game, Brice plays well as a screener, off ball, on ball, dominant on offense, offensive rebound, built for today's game, possession guy. He's hunting stuff. They're using him in a zone, okay, with his length, and it means he doesn't have to scramble as much because he's ball watching. But now he can hunt passing lanes because in a zone, you're a little more set, so you can watch the ball more and hunt passing lanes. He thrives in this, causes some turnovers, some blocks. They upset Iowa. At the end of the game, Brice feels some sensitivity in his repaired knee, so he sits out the next game as a cheerleader, okay? He is so animated from the bench against this Michigan State team that should have slaughtered Ohio State. Instead, Ohio State beats Michigan State and goes on to play Purdue, where they end up losing to a much stronger Purdue team. This is a story of overcoming adversity. For Brice as an individual, as a human being, this is a story about accepting your role, being truly humble, being a team player, and looking forward while remaining confident in the game that you do possess and accepting that your game needs work in other areas. And when we hear from Ohio State coach Chris Holtmann on the subject of taking Brice in and out during defensive possessions, here's what he has to say.
This is not an easy thing for a kid.
He's led you in scoring for 12 straight games.
He's being guarded. He wasn't guarded always by the best player early in the year. He's being guarded by the best player now. Like freshmen have moments. We'll help him the best we can. The young man's fighting hard. Give him credit. He's allowed to have an off shooting night. We'll find ways to put him in better positions.
When the reporter kept badgering Holtmann and trying to get him to say that Brice is just bad on defense, Holtmann's response was this.
If that's what you'd like to say, then feel free.
No, I'm asking you if he's had 2 bad games in a row.
I've answered the question. You can feel free to write that. I think Brice has battled hard here tonight. We'll find ways to put him in better position.
The coaching staff at Ohio State knows precisely why Brice was not playing defense. He's never experienced coaching or mentorship on it. He's always just been expected to score, and because he missed the end of high school, he's way behind in his development, but he's not way behind in his NBA-ready frame, his NBA-ready effort, his NBA-ready mind and mindset, and his skill on offense. This is a young man that I know will thrive at the next level with proper guidance, and he's more than willing to receive. I hope you've enjoyed learning about a prospect that I feel is largely misunderstood and should go up draft boards if scouts have done their actual homework on him, if they understand the lack of opportunity he had as a young player, and also the way he seized his opportunities at Ohio State and still accepted his role as a humble, high caliber, high character young man. Brice is the perfect fit for a 905 sort of system. And I think that I'm super excited to see him at the 905 if indeed he comes to Toronto. I think he's perfect, and I expect, to see the same ritual we saw last year, where our 2A guys from last year maybe get contracts. So Ron and Downton maybe joining the big club on minimum deals. Now, because I was so confident in this pick, I learned about it months ago, I sent one of our ambassadors, Scottie Barnes, down to Florida. So Scottie's a perfect ambassador because we could hide the fact that we were talking to Brice because Scottie's from down there. And I want to check in with Scottie now. Scottie, how did you find the navigation from West Palm Beach, your home, through Florida?
This is my home.
Yeah, I know it's your home. It's just 2 hours to Orlando, where Brice is from. I figured you'd be okay. Did you figure out a gift for Brice? I know you were thinking about one.
Well, people do say I'm a really good hugger.
Well, in addition to hugs, what did you get him?
The Scottie Barnes Axe Spray.
Well, that'll make him smell nice, Scottie. That's great.
Now that's fresh.
Smells great. Thanks for your support, guys. Enjoy the draft tomorrow. It's all about the Larrys.
This is Chef's Kiss approved. Mwah!